Hello! In this tutorial I'll teach you how to create two pages through HTML widgets, where the first page will show a list of records, and when the user clicks in that records it will open a pop-up showing the second page through an iframe. So let's log in our framework, choosing the advanced workspace and the corresponding projects. Now let's create here the two pages that we wish. So we'll create the schools page, which basically contains the list of schools, and we'll create a second page called edit school to edit the corresponding school that the user click. Okay, so let's start by editing the schools page. So let's just drag and drop here the schools table into the corresponding region, and let's select a list based in the table with only the view action, and let's proceed. We have done this before in the previous tutorials, so automatically the system creates all the resources and the corresponding widgets, and voila. Now let's install a template too, so we can see all of this better and more beautiful. And done. Okay, perfect. So we have here all templates, our page with the new templates. Let's preview the page to see what we have done until now. And currently we see that we have a list of schools. Okay, so now we want to add a link here at the end of each record. So when the user clicks in that link, it will open a pop-up showing the second page, which will be to edit that specific school that the user clicked. Now, how do I know what are the attributes that specific pop-up needs to receive? So let's create first the edit school so we can understand how can we pass corresponding school ID into this page. In which format we need to pass that school ID in the URL. So let's go to the edit school page and let's create the form to edit it. So let's browse the templates, choosing the corresponding template. In this case we'll not choose the same template because this page will appear in a pop-up, so we'll choose this template here, the pop-up template. Okay, and now let's drag and drop the school again to that specific region, but now instead of being a list, I want it to be a form, which will be an editable form. I click proceed, the system creates automatically the corresponding resources, and done. Okay, perfect. Now, where can we know that this is getting the specific school ID from the URL? So if we go to the form widgets, if we go to the properties of the form widgets, let's just expand this so we can see this better. If we scroll down, if we go to the widget settings, and if we scroll down until the widget properties, we see that we have a field called default values, where basically, as it says here, these will be the default values that will be passed by default to the search attributes and all used in the load resource. So when this page gets loaded, it will load a resource, which will be the school that we can see in here if we wish to, which basically load this school resource here, and automatically will pass this specific default value in the school ID, which is coming from the get school ID. So which means that the URL that will call this page needs to have an attribute called school ID. Okay, perfect. If you want to know more about the school resource, we can go always to the resource, and the school resource is this one here. Okay, let's save this page and let's go back to our schools page. Okay, now we want to add a link in here. Now we just have 3 columns, so we need to add a 4th column here. So let's select the table widgets, and in the properties let's add a new column in the ads and a new column in the body. Okay, which had these 2 columns here. And let's just copy all these attributes here, which contains a bunch of classes, so we want this to be the same. Okay, and perfect. Now we have these two other rows that needs to be expanded one more column. So if we check the call span, which is 3, needs to be 4. So now we have 4 columns because we add a new one. Okay, perfect. Now is everything perfect. Okay, cool. Okay, so now we want to drag to this column here a link. A link which we'll call edit only. Just call it edit. Okay. And this link will be a specific widget type. Which in the item widgets, I want this to be a button to open editable pop-up with item details. So this guy here. Okay. Which basically will open and edit pop-up by an ID. So get the item values, the primary keys of that specific records, and open the pop-up to edit that values. Okay, perfect. So we have below here we have some explanation, but basically let's just do this very fast. Okay, and now in here we need to put the pop-up ID, but we don't have yet the pop-up ID. So let's create a pop-up in here. So to do that, let's just go to the Bootstrap page and open the corresponding model examples that they have here, and let's just copy simple HTML that they have here. We copy, Ctrl C, and then we go here, we just drag and drop a new div to the place where we want to create a pop-up. We select that div and we select an option here saying widget HTML source, and we copy everything and we paste Ctrl A, Ctrl V the HTML that we copied from Bootstrap, and we close this source. Automatically the system grabs that HTML that we copy from Bootstrap and that we paste it in the source, and it converts to the specific widget, which is this widget here. So let's make some changes here. So we don't need the footer of the module, we don't need this guy here too. In here this is the model body, so in here we're gonna have the iframe. In this title maybe we need, maybe we don't. Well, we can just put here a title saying edit school, which then it will appear here the school name, something like that. So to do that, let's just drop here a new HTML block and convert it to a spam, where this spam basically will show the school name. So what we want to do is, in the resource attribute, I want to show the parents. So every time that this pop-up loads, it will get the school ID and automatically will load a new resource getting the school name, and then we'll print here that specific attribute, which will be the name. So in the pop-up we need to load that specific resource. So currently there is any resource that does that, so let's just create a new one, making these selections here, getting a specific resource, and let's just apply it. The system creates the school resource, perfect, put it here. So every time that we open the pop-up through this function here, so through this function here, the open item edit pop-up by ID, automatically this will get the corresponding primary keys of the record, and then we'll pass that primary keys to the pop-up, which it will load the resource school, passing the corresponding school ID to that resource, and then it will save the results, and automatically in here we will print the name inside of that result, which will be the school name. So let's just save and let me show you what we have done until now. Let's preview the schools. Okay, so when I click here edit, I should see a pop-up with the correspondent name. Well, we don't see any pop-up here because it's missing the pop-up ID. So when we edit the link here, we forgot to put the correspondent pop-up ID in here. So we need to put the correspondent pop-up from this element here, but to do that we need to create an ID first. So let's go back to our pop-up and let's create here an ID called popup_1, something like that, whatever the name you want to give. So let's now go back to the link and let's in here put, or we can write popup_1, or we can just go here and select the correspondent ID. There is none, so we just refresh and it should appear here. Well, it doesn't appear here because the pop-up, we need to set this pop-up as a pop-up widget type, so we can have these two handlers here that we want to use after. So now if we go back to the link and if we refresh, we see here the correspondent pop-up ID. Okay, and now we can save and test this again. Let's refresh the page, and now when I click here, voila, I have here the correspondent name of the school that I select. Okay, next step is to go to the pop-up and put an iframe inside of here. So let's set some dimensions. I want these to have the full width, the full height, 2, and a minimum height of, let's say, 7 VH. Okay, perfect. Now I can see that this is the parent div of this iframe, so this div here has some padding. So let's just remove the padding by adding a new class, p-0. Okay, now we can see the iframe appears like this. Okay, perfect. Let's select the iframe. And let's set now the iframe to open this correspondent page. Where we're gonna have the school ID attribute that we saw before, that we needed to pass in the URL. So, and we will not put any value here because then we're gonna do this dynamically through JavaScript. So for now, let's just copy this and let's just get this URL here from the source and let's create an attribute in this iframe with this correspondent URL, which we're gonna call data/source. Okay, so now every time that I open this pop-up, I want this iframe to be reloaded with this URL that I have here saved in these other attributes, and then it appends the school ID, the corresponding school ID that I select, into this URL, and then update the source attribute of the iframe, and then update this source attribute here in the iframe. So how can I do that? So I can do this through JavaScript. So in the pop-up, I have here in the pop-up, I have a property called showHandler, which basically we can create a JavaScript function and pass that JavaScript function here, and then every time that the pop-up opens, automatically, because the pop-up will be open through the open item edit pop-up function that we saw in this link here, automatically will set the corresponding primary keys in the pop-up, the end through the JavaScript, I can get that specific primary keys, which will be the school ID, and then I can append that school ID to the corresponding source. So basically I already have a file with these correspondent JavaScript functions, so I'll just show you so you can understand this. So basically in this file, so this is the function that we want to use, refresh iframe, and basically this refresh iframe, it will receive two arguments, the popup element and the mouse event. So every time if I put here refresh iframe, I put the name of the function here, and automatically when the popup opens, it will execute this function here, passing two arguments, the popup element and the mouse event. And then in the popup elements, I am getting the corresponding primary keys that was set before when I click in that edit link. That's how I get that property. So the property is the search underscore ATTRS, so search attributes. And automatically I get that specific property from the popup, and I check if this property is a string and starts with parentheses. It converts this to an object, so it means that this is a JSON code, and it converts that JSON code to an object. Otherwise it means that it's already an object, so I just keep with the current object. And then I get the iframe inside of the popup. Based on that iframe, I get the attribute that I created, the data/source, and I put it in a src variable. And then I increment, I append to that variable, to that src variable, which contains the corresponding URL, I append the school ID value, which is inside of the search attributes property. So this, when I click in the edit link of my table, it's set to the popup a property called search attributes, where inside has a school ID attribute with the corresponding school ID value. And I'm using here that value to append to the URL, which was the data source attribute that we create. And then I get that URL and I refresh and I update the source attribute of the iframe, where the iframe then will get refreshed. So all we need to do, we need to copy this function to the show handler field here, and then we need to create a JavaScript with that specific code. So we need to copy this code here so we can paste in a JavaScript that we'll create in here. So let's just find the JavaScript widgets. We can append it, like it could be here, and let's just copy here the corresponding function that we copied, the refresh iframe. So let's save this and see what happened. Let's refresh the page, and now every time that I click edit here, it shows me this iframe that's specific to the school page with the correspondent ID that I pass it. If I click in this one, it shows me another school. If I click in this school, it shows me another school. This close button is not working because when we copy the HTML from this model, something is missing in that button. So let's just fix that meanwhile. So in this button here, there is an attribute missing here, which is the BS dismiss. Okay, it's missing this. So if we save, and if you refresh the page, now when I close here, it's working. Okay, perfect. Now let's say that I do some change here and I save it. Okay, it's saved here in the iframe. When I close the pop-up, I want to see the new value that I put it here in that list, but it's not showing here. So how can we do that? So if we go back to the pop-up, we have here in the widgets properties, we have here a property called iHandler, where I can pass another JavaScript function, which then can refresh that other widget, that the specific table. So how can I do that? I will create a new JavaScript function which does that. So I already have that function here. Let me show you, which is the on popup closed function. This function here, which basically what it will do is load the dependent widgets and pass the ID of that widget, which is the widget underscore list. So if we go to this widget here, we see that the ID is widget underscore list underscore 1, which is this list here. So just by calling this statement, this JavaScript code statement, automatically to refresh that table. So we can just copy this function here and put it in the popup property, in the hide handler property. We can just put this function here, which again receives a popup element and a mouse event, and then we can just copy this specific function in the JavaScript in here. Let's just copy this below, and we can just save this and execute again, refresh again this table. Okay, so now it shows already with the change, because we changed before and now we refresh it, so it shows the new value. So when I add it, if I write something here, if I save it, it saves successfully. When I close this, it refresh the table with that correspondent value. Here it is. Now the problem is that this is refreshing all the tables. So if I have a lot of records, it can be a little bit slow, or is not be slow, but is not be as fast as it should be. So if I imagine that I don't want to refresh all the records, I just want to refresh this specific record here from the popup that I am editing. So how can I do that? So in this case, I needed to edit my popup close function. Instead of having this code here, I needed to have another code, which I already have here too. So basically I needed to have this code here, which basically, what does this code here? Basically gets the search attributes from the popup, which contains the corresponding school ID, converts that search attributes into an object, because this is a JSON string, so it converts to a JSON object, and then it refreshes that specific widget that we have here, the table, but in this case with only that specific item, that specific record, wherein here we say that only update this item and pass the corresponding search attributes here, wherein here we just have one school ID, so to update only one record. So just by doing this, it doesn't refresh anymore the whole table, it only refreshes that specific record. So if we come back here and if we paste it in here, we can save this. Then automatically when we refresh here the page, if we edit something here, when we save, when we close the pop-up, we don't see this anymore refreshing, we just see this item getting refreshed. And basically that's it. So basically this was just to show you different ways how to have two pages talking with each other. Obviously that this example maybe doesn't make any sense. Maybe to make more sense, instead of having the ID here, I could just click here in the name, so I could just convert this attribute here to a link, which will do the same thing than this. Every time maybe this edit school here doesn't make any sense since it is repeated here. This was just to show you examples how to do that. Maybe in here these buttons doesn't make any sense, maybe it should save automatically, so I should save in this form, the auto save active. All of this is possible, as I show you in the previous tutorials, just by selecting a few settings in the widgets properties when we are editing the specific form. Maybe every time that I save here, or that it will save the auto save, maybe automatically it should refresh this table, so it should not be on close. basically every time that I click here or that I execute autosave, I can have handlers too, callbacks, which means that are JavaScript functions, and in that JavaScript functions I could call some parent function from this page here, and in this page here I'll ask, basically I'll do the same, I'll call the same JavaScript functions that we created, that we are executing when we close this pop-up to refresh the corresponding table. So basically I could do a bunch of different things. But basically in this tutorial I just wanted to show you how simple it is to create two pages, one that opens another pop-up and passing values from one page to another. And that's it. So thank you very much.